Rain had been falling on the cliff road for 3 days, and by the time the hired carriage reached the top of the headland, the last gray light was draining out of the sea. Eloan saw the house before she saw the trouble. Windcliff Hall stood long and dark on the edge of the land, its face turned to the water, every window black but 2. It did not look like a house that was expecting a bride, it looked like a house holding its breath. Then she heard it, men shouting down toward the shore, and beneath the shouting a woman's voice screaming the same word over and over, and the word was a name. Eloan was out of the carriage before the step was down, her hem in the mud, her hood torn back by the wind. She did not stop to think. She had never, in the whole of her life, been able to stand still inside the sound of someone else's terror. A path cut down through the gorse to a shingle cove, and the cove was full of people. Lanterns swung wild in the wind. A knot of fishermen and grooms stood in a ring, and in the middle of the ring, laid out on the wet stones, was a boy. He was perhaps 7 years old. He was the color of a drowned candle, blue-white, his lips gone gray, his small chest utterly still. A woman knelt over him with both hands pressed to her mouth. A spare man in black crouched beside the body, felt at the thin neck and rose. "He is gone," he said. "There is nothing to be done. Take him up to his mother's and someone fetch a sheet." He said it the way a man reads a figure off a slate. He was too long under. The woman made a sound that did not belong to the daylight world. 2 men bent to lift the boy, and a voice cut clean across all of it, low and absolutely certain. "Don't touch him." Eloan came through the ring of lanterns in her ruined traveling clothes, a stranger, soaked to the bone, unknown to a single soul on that shore. She went down onto the stones beside the boy, laid 2 fingers beneath his jaw and her cheek to his mouth, and for 1 heartbeat she was as still as he was. "He has not been under as long as you think," she said. "The cold has slowed him." "In the sea the cold is the one mercy there is, madam," the man in black began. "Stand back." She did not look at him. She rolled the boy onto his side, set the heel of her hand beneath his ribs, and pushed, once hard, upward. Seawater came out of him in a rush. She turned him again, tilted the small head, pinched the small nose shut, sealed her mouth over his, and breathed. The cove went silent, but for the wind, she breathed for him. She pressed the narrow chest with both hands, counting under her breath in a rhythm all her own, and breathed again a minute. The man in black said, behind her, that this was unseemly and useless. She did not hear him. 2 minutes. The boy's mother had stopped screaming and knelt frozen, watching this drenched stranger fight the sea for what the sea had already taken. "Come back," Eloan told the boy very quietly, as though the 2 of them were alone on the shore. "Not tonight. You are not going tonight. Come back to me." The boy convulsed. He coughed, a terrible, wet, wonderful sound, and brought up seawater onto the stones, and dragged in a breath that whistled, and began weakly to cry. The thin sound of a living child went up the cliff through the rain, and the whole cove seemed to break apart at once. The mother wailing, the men shouting, someone sobbing outright. Eloan eased him onto his side so he would not choke, and held him there with her hand moving slow circles on his back, and she was not smiling, only breathing hard, her eyes shut. "The drowned are not always lost," she said to no one, to the boy, to herself. High on the cliff path, above the reach of the lanterns, a man stood alone in a long, dark coat and did not come down. He had come out at the noise the way a master comes out at any disturbance on his own land, meaning to send someone to see to it. He had sent no one. He had watched a woman he had married, and scarcely spoken to, kneel on the stones and call a dead child back out of the water, out of the very cove that had, 3 winters before, taken something of his own and given nothing back. He did not feel what a man is meant to feel. He felt the old cold close over him like a returning tide. Beside him, His butler had come out bareheaded into the rain, an upright gray man of 60 who had served the house since before this duke was born. "Your Grace," Bramwell said softly, "that is her Grace. That is the boy the sea had. She has—" He stopped, because there did not seem to be a word for it. The Duke of Wincliffe watched his wife stand up in the wreck of her wedding clothes, with a living child in her arms, and something in his face closed, like a shutter drawn against a storm. "Write to the lawyers when the roads are open," he said. "In the spring she was never meant for this house, and I do not mean to keep her in it." He turned and went back inside out of the rain. Bramwell stayed a while longer on the cliff after his master had gone. In 40 years under that roof, he had seen the sea give back nets and timber and twice the bodies of grown men. He had never once seen it give back a breathing child. He went down the wet path to offer her Grace his arm up the stones, and he thought, though he would have gone to the block sooner than say it aloud, that the Duke had just made the first mistake in what he suspected would prove a long and costly line of them. They had been married 11 weeks, and the Duke of Wincliffe did not know his wife at all. He knew only what the marriage articles had told him, that she was a lone, sole living child of a Cornish gentleman named Trevick, who had died owing more than his land could cover, that she had 2 small brothers who would have gone to the parish but for the settlement, that she came with no fortune, no connections worth the name, and a face that drew no second glance. He had married her in a bare chapel in the south to discharge a debt of honor his own dead father had left behind, and he had ridden north the same night. He did not know the rest. Wow. He did not know that the gentleman named Trevick had spent his last 4 years dying by inches of a wasting sickness, and that his daughter had nursed him through every hour of it, and that in the nursing she had learned things no gentlewoman was ever intended to know. He did not know that when the money was gone and the physicians stopped calling, Eliwen had walked to the one place that would still teach her. The fever house at the town's edge, where an old apothecary woman took in the poor that no one else would touch. He did not know she had spent 3 years there, learning to set a bone and draw a fever and breathe the life back into the half-drowned among people it would have horrified the county to know. She stood beside. It was not a thing a lady could ever own to. A lady who had laid her hands on the dying poor was a lady no great house would receive. So she had folded that part of herself away, the way she folded everything away, and come north to be a duke's convenient wife, and she had brought almost nothing with her. 1 trunk, a few plain gowns, and wrapped in oilcloth at the very bottom, where no maid would think to look, a worn leather roll of instruments, a lancet, a curved needle, a hank of waxed silk, a horn box of dried herbs, the tools of a trade a duchess was never, on any account, supposed to own. She had meant to keep them hidden. She had meant to be quiet and useful only in the small permitted ways, to give this cold, grieving house nothing whatever it could object to, and above all, to go unnoticed because to be looked at closely is to be found out, and she had a great deal that could not afford the finding. She had held to that resolution, exactly, until she heard a mother scream a name into the sea. Now she stood dripping in a strange hall with a rescued child's cold, still clinging to her hands, every servant in Wincliffe staring, and understood with a sinking that was almost grief that she had already failed at the one thing she had come here to do. She had been seen. Wincliffe should have been a glad house. 200 years of grey stone stood wide-winged on that headland, built and beloved by people who were now only names on the chapel wall. But a house is alive only so long as it is kept, and this one had quietly stopped being kept. It was going under room by shuttered room, and the going under had the particular silence of a thing everyone in the household had agreed, without ever discussing it, not to see. It had not always been so. Eliwen learned the shape of the grief inside her first week, the way one always learns such things, from half-sentences that broke off when she entered a room. 3 winters past there had been another life under that roof. The Duke's younger brother Coran, 24, reckless and laughing and adored. the brother Alaric had all but raised himself. One bright, still morning Corinne had taken a boat past the point, on a wager with the tide, and the tide had won. They had carried him up from the same cove where Aloan had knelt on her first night. They had not carried him up breathing. Since that morning, the Duke had not once gone down to the water. He had not unlocked the east rooms that had been Corinne's. He had not, the servants murmured, been rightly warmed to a living soul, and he had let the running of the whole estate slide out of his hands, because everything that wanted doing had once been done gladly, and every undone thing was now only a reminder. A grieving master and a neglected house. It is frightening how fast the two of them together will rot. Good silver sat unpolished and blackening in its bays. Rain got into rooms that stayed locked, and no one climbed up to find where. The tenants' cottages out on the moor stood unmended, though their rents somehow crept higher every quarter day. And over the whole of it, keeping every key and every ledger and every unpaid bill, sat the one man the Duke had been only too grateful to let carry the weight. The steward, Mr. Caen. Prisk, a soft, smiling, tireless man who rendered account to nobody living. There was a second man, Aloan liked even less, though she could not yet have told you why. The house physician, Dr. Gowder, Nietzsche, the spare figure in black from the cove who had laid 2 fingers on a living child and pronounced him dead, came and went from the Duke's own apartments with his leather bag and his solemn face, for the Duke was not well. He had been ailing the better part of a year, a slow gray sinking that the whole household laid at the door of his sorrow. A wasting, they called it, a grief in the blood. Aloan, who had watched a man die by inches and knew to the hour what a natural wasting looked like, said nothing at all. But she began, very quietly, to watch, and someone, she found, was watching her back. In her second week, a bell called her up to the south tower, where the Duke's grandmother kept her own rooms and let nothing under that roof escape her. The Dowager Duchess Honoria was 80 years old and sat bolt upright. Age had ruined her hands but had not cost her a single grain of her attention. She looked Aloan up and down for one long, unhurried minute, and then she said, "So, you are the girl my grandson means to send away in the spring." A pause, and the ghost of something sharp. "We shall see about that." "Sit," the dowager said, and Aloan sat in the hard chair placed where the gray window light fell full on her face. Set there, she understood at once, so the old woman could read every flicker it made. Honoria studied her the way a jeweler studies a stone a stranger has carried and weighing flaw against worth, and in no hurry to name either. "My grandson tells me nothing. He never has," she said at last. "But servants tell me everything, and 3 of them have brought me the same story. That his Grace's new wife went down to the cove her first night and lifted a drowned child off the stones after Nietzsche had pronounced him dead. Nietzsche is a fool, but he is a fool with a license, and in this house no one contradicts him. No one but you. The pale eyes held her. How did you know the boy could be brought back?" Aloan gave the answer. She kept ready, worn smooth from long use. Anyone might have seen he was worth trying for, Your Grace. He was cold, and the cold. "Do not," said Honoria, "spend my time pretending to be ordinary. I have very little of it left. You knew things on that shore that no gentlewoman knows, and I shall not ask you where you learned them. I am 80 years old. I have buried 2 husbands and a good many secrets, several of them my own. And I know a hidden trade when it walks into my room wearing a plain wife's gown. What I am asking is whether you will make yourself useful. There is a difference between being able and being willing, and a woman who cannot tell the two apart does not get far in this world." Aloan was quiet a moment.
"I am willing,"
she said. "Good." The old woman settled back, and for a breath the sharpness left her, and something warier took its place. "Then hear how things truly stand, since no one else will say it plainly. This house is being robbed, not of spoons, of everything. When my grandson's mother died, and old Kara, who had kept the keys since before him died the winter after. There was no mistress and no housekeeper left, and the whole running of Wyncliffe dropped into the hands of the steward, Prisk. He gathered up the keys for safekeeping, he said. The safekeeping has lasted 3 years, and every one of them still lives in his own pocket. And my husband permits it? My grandson is not a weak man, whatever this house has decided among itself. He is a grieving one, and grief in a strong man is mistaken for weakness only by people who have never had to carry any. He let Prisk take the keys, because he could not bear to lay a hand on anything Corin had touched. But when one man holds every key and renders his account to nobody, you may be sure the house is being hollowed from the inside. I have watched it hollowed for 3 years. I am too old now to stop it. You are not. She reached to the small table at her elbow, and with fingers that would scarcely obey her, pushed across a worn iron ring holding 3 keys. The still room, the linen presses, and the stores. Kara's own, I kept these 3 back when Prisk swept up the rest, and he has never had the nerve to ask an old woman to hand them over. They are yours now, on my authority, which in this house runs a great deal deeper than his. It is little enough. It is a door. What you make of the door is your own affair. Eloan closed her hand around the keys. They were warm from the fire and heavier than they looked. Your Grace, my husband means to send me away when the road's open. I know it. He announced it to his butler on the cliff top like a man canceling a delivery of coal. The old edge came back into her voice. The thaw reaches this coast in March. That leaves you something under 4 months to turn yourself into a thing. This house cannot bring itself to give up. Were I you, I should not waste an hour of it. Eloan went down the tower stair with the 3 keys shut in her fist and her mind already moving, cool and quick, over everything a week had shown her. The blackening silver, the rain in the locked rooms, the gray sinking man she had not yet been allowed to meet as a wife meets a husband, and the 2 soft-spoken men who came and went from his door, as though the house were theirs. A door, the old woman had called it. Eloan had spent her whole life learning how much could be done with very little. She thought a door would do nicely. The house did not believe in her, and it said so in the way houses do. Below stairs, after dark, and never once to her face. By the close of her 2nd week there was a wager running in the servants' hall, openly enough that everyone knew its terms, and it was reckoned a fair one. 6 pence, said the new Duchess would be gone by Lady Day. Carried south on the first dry roads exactly as the master had promised, packed off like a parcel delivered to the wrong house. A shilling. More daringly said she would not last even so long. That the cold rooms and the closed master and the ever-smiling steward would wear her down by Candlemas. Even the kitchen maid who liked her, a soft-hearted girl named Tegan, had laid her copper quietly on the spring. Eloan knew of the bet inside 3 days, because a person nobody troubles to notice overhears a great deal. She did not resent it. In private she thought it a shrewd wager. She had all but made it herself the night she put her name to a contract with a man she had met exactly once, and rode north to a house that plainly did not want her. She had no intention of winning it by argument. Argument had never once in her life gone her way. That was a weapon for people others were already minded to listen to, and she had never been one of those. She would win, if she won at all, the only way she had ever trusted, by making herself so necessary, so quietly, that one day the house would look up and find it could no longer picture running itself without her. And by then, no one would recall there had ever been a bet to settle. So she said nothing of the dowager's keys. She did not remind a single soul that she was, whatever her husband intended, still the Duchess of Wyncliffe. She simply picked up 1 piece at a time, the neglected work that everyone else in the house had learned to step around, did each part of it properly, and let the finished thing be the whole of her argument. She began with a still room, because a still room tells the truth about a house faster than any ledger will. Wyncliffe stood at the end of the north passage behind one of Kara's 3 keys, and when Eloan turned the lock and pushed the door, the air that came out told her most of what she needed to know. damp, mice, and 3 years of sweet things left to spoil. She spent 2 days on it alone, and on her knees, saying nothing to anyone. She carried out jars of preserve, gone to gray fur, and drawers of herbs crumbled to dust. And on a high shelf at the very back, she found a row of small pots labeled in a neat, faded hand she did not recognize. Cordials, a salve for chilblains, a syrup for a child's cough, the whole physic store of some long-dead woman, Kara perhaps, or the mother no one in the house would name. All spoiled now, all untouched since Wyncliffe had stopped being kept. Eloin scrubbed out every pot and saved every label, because to scrape a dead woman's writing off her own jars felt like burying her a second time. Then, quietly, she began to fill the shelves again, from the roll of instruments and the horn box she had sworn to keep hidden, and from the moor itself, whose hedgerows she walked in the gray hour before the house woke. Within a fortnight, the still room smelled of beeswax and dried lavender and honest work, and it had become, though no one had decided it should, the one warm room below stairs that people invented reasons to walk through. They came for the warmth first, and then they came for her hands. The cook, a vast and anxious woman named Morab, laid her forearm open to the elbow on a spilled copper, and Eloin dressed the scald so that it healed clean and barely pained her, and after that the kitchen was hers. A groom tore his hand on a broken hinge. She closed it with the curved needle and the waxed silk while he watched, white-faced and silent, and the stable was hers. Jory, the boy the sea had given back, mended slowly in his mother's cottage with a cough that frightened the whole village, and Eloin went down through the gorse every second day to sit with him, and the fishing families under the cliff, who had buried too many of their own children, watched this strange new duchess breathe over one of theirs, and decided, without a word passing between them, that she belonged to them. She did none of it as a duchess. She asked for no curtsy, pulled rank on no one, sent not a single order through Prisk. She only appeared wherever there was pain, and quietly took it away, and let that stand in place of any speech. One by one the people of Wyncliffe stopped laying money on how soon she would go, and started, without ever quite noticing the change in themselves, to bring their troubles to her door. Even Bramwell, who as a rule mistrusted anyone with fewer than 30 years' service, took to bringing her the small household questions he had long ago given up carrying to a silent master. The master himself she had still not been permitted to nurse, but she watched him, across the vast cold length of the dinner table where he sat at one end and she at the other, too far apart for talk, which suited them both. She watched the gray deepen in his face and the tremor grow in his hand, and she saw how he set down his glass after Nietzsche's evening draught, and seemed, within the hour, plainly worse. The longer she watched, the colder her certainty grew, until there came a night she could no longer keep still inside it. The Duke's valet had left the tonic on a tray outside his door. Low in passing, did the thing no wife and no servant had any business doing. She drew the little cork and touched the bottle to her lips, not to drink, only to taste and to smell. Then she stood a long moment in the dark passage, quite still, because beneath the honey and the wine there was another thing, bitter and faintly metallic and horribly familiar, a taste she had met before at the fever house, over the beds of men who did not get up again. It was not grief that was killing the Duke of Wyncliffe. It was a dose, measured into his own cup every evening by a hand that intended it. She went to no one. She had learned long ago that a truth half-built is more dangerous than none, that a suspicion can be laughed out of any room, and she had no proof, only a taste in the dark. So she did the one thing, that night aloud, when she carried the tray in herself, telling the startled valet that the dowager wished her grace to sit with the Duke, which was very nearly true. She left the tonic standing untouched, and gave him instead, from the physic folded in her sleeve, a draught of her own making. It was the first time she had been close to him since the shore. He lay propped gray against the pillows in a room that smelled of sickness and shut windows, and he looked up at her out of Corin's own dark eyes gone dull, and said in a voice worn to a thread, "You are the woman from the cove." "I am your wife, your grace," she said, and set the cup to his lips. He was too tired to argue. He drank. "They tell me," he said, when it was done, "that you go about my house mending things, cooks and grooms and fishermen's boys." A pause. The faint ghost of something that in a well-man might once have been humor. "And now, Dukes, it seems, you needn't trouble. I am past mending, and you are gone in the spring. So I keep being told," Eloin said, "by everyone. It is remarkable how settled the whole house is about my future, when not one person in it has thought to ask me." She drew the coverlet straight with the same plain competence. She gave a stitched hand or a scalded arm. "Sleep, your grace. You will be stronger by morning. Do not thank me for it, and do not on any account drink a thing Dr. Nietzsche leaves at your door until I have seen it first." He was asleep before he could ask her why. She sat on a while in the shut gray room, watching his breath climb up out of its shallow struggle into something slower and deeper, and she thought, with a plain, clear ache that had no place at all in a marriage of convenience, that here was a good man drowning 3 winters after the sea had finished with his brother, and that no one under his own roof had once put out a hand to him. She would not have called it love. She was far too sensible and far too frightened for that. But it was the small beginning that love so often starts from, minding what becomes of a person when it would be so very much safer not to. Let us stop there a moment. If you have ever watched a good soul be overlooked, and quietly hoped that this once it might go otherwise, stay with us, because it is about to. And if you would rather not miss the rest of Eloin's story, take a breath to subscribe before we go on. By morning, the Duke of Wyncliffe sat up in his bed and asked for beef broth for the first time in a month. Nietzsche, arriving at noon with his leather bag and his grave and careful face, found his patient risen, his tonic untouched upon the tray, and a pair of level gray eyes watching him from the corner of the room, eyes that had not been in this house the last time a duke lay conveniently dying in it. Over the next fortnight the Duke of Wyncliffe came back from the edge of the grave, and only 2 people in the house understood that he was doing it, and only one of them was glad. Eloin managed it the way she managed everything, quietly and without fuss. She could not stop Nietzsche's tonic outright. That would have declared open war before she was ready, so she did the next thing. She contrived that the Duke drank as little of it as she could arrange, spilling a measure here, setting her own honest cordial in its place there, and each day she gave him instead the plain good physic of rest and broth, and the clean bitter draughts that draw poison slowly back out of the blood. Color returned to his face by degrees. The tremor left his hands. He began to sleep like a living man, and not like a corpse in rehearsal. And as his body cleared, so did his eyes, and Eloin knew that a recovering man asks the questions a dying one has no strength for. She had very little time now before someone noticed what she had already noticed. She began where the fever house had taught her to begin, over every bed, not with what is killing this man, but with who is the better for it. She put the question one gray afternoon to the dowager. Honoria did not pretend to misunderstand her. "If my grandson dies without a child of his body," the old woman said, setting down her cup with great care, "Wyncliffe and the whole of it, the land, the name, the last shilling goes to his cousin, Cassius Vane, my sister's grandson. A charming man. He has been so very attentive since Corin drowned. He comes at every season and sits with Alaric and grieves so beautifully. He is also, I am given to understand, some 11,000 pounds in debt to men who do not forgive it." She looked into the fire. "I had taken him for a mere vulture. Are you about to tell me he is something worse?" "I am telling you," Eloin said, "that your grandson is not wasting. He is being poisoned. A little each night, in a bottle that comes to his door under Dr. Nietzsche's name." The old woman did not gasp. She had lived 80 years and heard worse things, said in softer voices. She asked only, after a moment. And who put Nietzsche into this house? It was the right question, and Aloan had already found its answer. Nietzsche had not come with the estate. He had arrived 3 winters ago, in the very season Corin died, recommended, the household said, by the Duke's good cousin Vane, who had felt that dear Alaric ought to have a physician always at hand in his grief. Prisk the steward had made the arrangements. Prisk paid Nietzsche's handsome fees out of the estate, quarter after quarter, and no one ever questioned the physician's bills, for who counts the cost of caring for a grieving duke? That was the shape of it, and Aloan saw the whole of it, now the way one suddenly sees the picture hidden in a puzzle, Vane at the center, holding the debts, Nietzsche the hand that measured the dose, Prisk the man who kept the books honest on their faces and rotten underneath, feeding the estate's slow blood into Vane's bottomless pockets while the master they robbed lay too grieved to lift his eyes. They had needed no cleverness. They had needed only a house with no mistress, a lord who would not look, and time. They had had all 3, and they had very nearly had the end of it, a childless duke in the ground by spring, and a charming cousin come into everything, when a drenched stranger knelt on the shore and began, without meaning to unpick the whole design. There was the money, too, and money leaves a broader trail than poison. Her 3 keys led her into the stores, and an honest inventory of the stores was all it took to catch Prisk out. She counted what truly stood on the shelves, the candles, the cloth, the sacks of meal, and set her count against the sums the steward posted for them, in the book he hung on the passage wall for form's sake, and no arithmetic she knew would make the 2 agree. Prisk bought little and charged much, and the difference ran off the page, and out of the house. She said nothing. She only wrote down in her own small hand what a thing had cost against what the book pretended, and kept the 2 figures side by side, where they told their own quiet story. Then she went after the poison itself. From the still room a door gave onto the little dispensary where Nietzsche kept his stock, and one afternoon while the physician rode to town, she let herself in with her mother's thin steel bodkin, which opened his locked case as readily as any key. Among the honest tinctures stood a squat blue bottle with no label. She drew the stopper and touched it to her tongue, and it was the taste from the passage, distilled down to a small and patient death. Beside it lay a folded letter, unsigned, in a slanting hand. His improvement is remarked upon. See that it does not continue. C comes at Whitsun, and the business must be finished before. She put the letter back exactly as it had lain, and the bottle beside it, and locked the case, and stood a moment in the cold dispensary with her heart going hard. She had her shape, and her taste, and now a hand on paper. It was not yet enough. A taste no court would hear. A letter naming no one, but a single traveling initial. But it told her one thing that turned her cold all through. The business must be finished before Whitsun, and Whitsun was 6 weeks off, and the Duke of Wyncliffe, growing stronger every day under her hand, had just become the most dangerous thing a marked man can be, inconvenient. Nietzsche was not a fool, whatever the dowager thought him. A physician who trades in slow poison learns to watch for the one pair of eyes in a house that sees too much, and he had marked Aloan's the morning he found his patient sitting up and his tonic untouched. He came to her 3 days later in the still room, where she was straining a cordial, and he came smiling, which she had already learned was the most dangerous thing about the men of this house. He admired her arrangements. He remarked how the servants doted on her. He observed ever so gently what a wonderful thing it was for a lady of no particular family to have risen so high, and what a pity, a great pity, how swiftly such a rise could be undone by a word in the right ear. "You are not quite what you present yourself to be, Your Grace," Nietzsche said, turning a jar in his soft hands. "A duchess who knows the taste of antimony, who stitches grooms, who was seen, before her marriage, going in and out of a charity fever house among the poor of a southern town, the county would find that most interesting. His Grace's lawyers, who I understand, are already drawing the papers to release him from an unhappy match, would find it more interesting still. A wife like that may be set aside in a single morning, and no one will say the Duke did wrong. He set the jar down. Precisely. Keep to your cordials, madam, nurse whom you please below stairs. But do not imagine you understand a sickness better than the physician who has attended it 3 years. It would not be safe. Illness is a chancy business. It takes the strong and the meddlesome as readily as the weak. He bowed and smiled, and left, and the threat stood in the warm room after him like a smell that would not clear. And Elowen, who had faced a drowning sea without flinching and a screaming crowd without raising her voice, found that she was afraid, not of the poison, of being seen. Every word Nietzsche had spoken was true, and every one of them was a rope that could hang her. To save the Duke, she would have to stand up in the full light and name what she was and how she knew it. And the instant she did, she became a low woman who had laid hands on men's bodies for money, a fraud in a duchess's gown, exactly the wife a grateful husband could be freed from before breakfast. She would lose the house, the tenants, the boy on the shore. She would be turned out with a ruined name into a world that had never once been gentle to a woman alone. For 2 days, she told herself, it was not her fight. She was leaving in the spring. The lawyers were already at their papers. She could go quietly now, take the small freedom coming to her, and let a rich man's cousin murder a rich man's heir, in a house that had never wanted her. She very nearly believed it. She packed the argument around her heart like wool, and it very nearly held. Then, on the 3rd morning, the Dowager Duchess Honoria did not come down. Honoria did not come down because in the night someone had seen to it that she would not. Elowen found her gray and shallow breathing in the great bed of the South Tower, her lips faintly blue, a cup of her evening posset standing half-drunk on the table, and one taste of the dregs told the whole of it. They had grown tired of the old woman's questions. It was the same patient hand as always, only quicker now, because Whitsun was coming and careful people had begun to hurry. Elowen spent no breath on outrage. She worked. She emptied the old woman's stomach and forced warm water and charcoal and her own bitter antidote into her through the long, gray hours of that morning, and did not leave the bedside. And a little after noon, Honoria's breathing lengthened, and her color crept back, and her eyes came open, furious and alive. "Well," the dowager said faintly when she could speak, "they have decided I am inconvenient. No one has called me inconvenient since 1799. I find I had missed it." Her ruined hand closed on Elowen's wrist with surprising strength. "Now you hear me, girl. I am too old to be worth the killing twice, and you are the only soul in this house who saw it done. If you go on being careful, being safe, being invisible, we are all of us dead by summer, and that charming boy is master here, and there is no one left alive who knows. Do you understand me? Safe is finished. Safe was always going to finish. The only choice left you is whether you finish it standing up. It was not the threat to her own life that turned her. It was the old woman's hand on her wrist, and the boy Jory mending in his cottage, and the plain, unbearable thought that every good and frightened person in this house was being quietly murdered around her precisely because each of them, herself most of all, had judged it safer to look away. Nietzsche had built the whole of it on other people's fear. He had needed no genius, only a house full of decent souls who would each, for perfectly good reasons, keep still. She had been the best of his instruments. She had kept stiller than any of them. She went down to the cove that afternoon, alone, and stood where she had knelt on her first night and watched the tide come in over the stones. The tide did not hurry and did not argue and did not ask anyone's leave. It only came and took what it had come for. She thought she had better learn to be more like the tide. She made up her mind on the shore, and she never afterward unmade it. She could not go to the Duke with a taste on her tongue, and a story about his beloved cousin. He was a recovering man, not a well one, and grief still stood between him and the truth like a bolted door. A wife he meant to divorce, accusing the one relation who had faithfully mourned with him, would be called hysterical, or worse, and set aside within the week, and then there would be no one left. She needed the thing itself. She needed proof a magistrate could hold in his 2 hands that not even a charming man could smile away. So, she built it, over the next 5 weeks, the way she had learned to build everything, quietly, at night, a little at a time. She could not take the blue bottle without warning them, so she did better. She drew off a few drops of the tonic each evening into a phial of her own, and sealed and dated each one in her own hand, a record of the dose, night upon night, that no man could call an accident. She copied the unsigned letter word for word before she dared not go back. She set her honest inventory of the stores against Prisk's posted figures until the theft stood plain in 2 columns. And she did the boldest thing last. Under the honest excuse of settling the sick room's small account, she got the apothecary in town to give her, in writing, the whole list of what Dr. Brea Nietzsche had bought from him these 3 years, and there in an honest tradesman's ledger, the mineral stood plain, quarter upon quarter of it through the past year, a tasteless poison no healing man on earth would ever need, bought in a physician's name and charged to the Wincliffe estate. She kept all of it where she had always kept the truth of herself, rolled inside the oilcloth with her instruments, the lancet, the needle, and now the files and the copied letter and the columns of figures pushed to the bottom of a locked box beneath her plain gowns. She worked by 1 candle with her door bolted, and twice she was nearly caught. Once by Prisk on the north stair after dark, who asked her in his soft way what business a lady had so near the estate office at that hour, and got for it a perfectly calm account of a still-room shelf that wanted seeing too. Who watched her too long across the hall, and plainly did not like that. She had not gone quiet and small as a frightened woman should. She met his eyes and gave him nothing, and went on. And all the while, without either of them meaning it, she and the man she was fighting to save came to know one another. It happened over his recovery, in the hours when she came to change his dressings and see him fed, awake and mending. He was nothing like the cold figure on the cliff. Under the shut face lay a dry, quiet wit and a great buried gentleness, gone all to grief the way an orchard goes wild when the one who used to prune it stops coming out. He began to wait for her visits. He began, gruffly at first, and then not, to talk. He spoke of Corin one gray evening with the window open to the sound of the sea he would not go down to. He was 10 years the younger, and I raised him more than our father ever did. And he was everything. I am not. Loud and reckless and easy to love. He took the boat out on a wager. A wager. With me, I bet him he hadn't the nerve to round the point before the tide turned. He turned the old grief over in his hands like a stone worn smooth past all counting. I was up on the cliff. I saw the boat go over. I could not reach him in time. I have gone over every stroke of it more times than there are hours in 3 years, and I am always too slow, and he is always gone. He looked at her. You pulled a stranger's child out of that same water in the time it took me to fail my own brother. Do you wonder I could not bear the sight of you? Eloan did not tell him she was sorry. She had learned long ago that sorrow is the cheapest and most useless coin there is. She said instead, "You did not fail him by being slow. The sea is faster than any man alive. That is the whole horror of it. If you failed him at all, it was by staying up on that cliff for 3 years afterward, where it could not reach you, and neither could anyone else." She tied off the last of the dressing. The drowned are not always lost, your grace, but the living can drown on dry land if they hold their breath long enough. I have watched you do it since the night I came. He was quiet a long while, then he said, in quite another voice, "No one has spoken to me so in 3 years." "No," she agreed. "They have all been too kind to you." Kindness has very nearly finished what the sea began, and something that was almost a smile, the first she had seen on him, moved across his tired face and was gone. She should have kept her distance after that, and she knew it, and she did not. The evenings drew out. The house slept. She stayed later in the quiet room than his dressings needed, and he asked her to. And one night, with the sea loud below the open window and a single candle burning low, the careful space they had both been keeping simply closed. They were two people who had each been alone a very long time, turning at last, against all sense, toward one another, and what passed between them that night was quiet and private, and belonged to no one but themselves. She did not regret it then, or after. Whatever else was taken from her in the weeks that came, that one night was hers, freely given and freely received, and she folded it away with the few other things in her life that had been purely good. He drew back from it within the week, as she had half known he would. She found him one morning at the window with his face shut again, and he did not turn round. "I have done you a wrong," Alaric said. "Another one. I married you to settle my father's debt, and never once thought of you as anything but a line in a contract. And then I let." He stopped. "You did not come to this house to be a dying man's comfort and a cursed line's broodmare. You came because you had nowhere else, and I mean to see you never make that bargain again. The lawyers will have the papers by Whitsun. You will be free of me, with money enough settled on you and your brothers that you need never marry, or serve, or hide. Again, it is the one decent thing I have left to give." He said it as a gift. He believed it was one. "You deserve to be chosen for yourself by a whole man, not kept out of gratitude by one the sea should have taken with his brother." Eloin stood very still, and understood that he was in his blindness breaking both their hearts in the certainty that he was mending hers. And she understood one thing more, a thing she had suspected for a fortnight, and now, standing there, knew past doubting, that she already carried the single fact that would have unmade every word he had just spoken, an heir, his child. The one thing that would have bound him to her, past any freeing, and stripped his cousin of every reason to wait, and that would, the instant it was known, make her and the child the most dangerous obstacle left in Cassius Vane's road. She did not tell him. Pride kept the half of it. She would not be kept for a child in her belly by a man who had just gently told her he was setting her loose. Fear kept the rest. A secret heir is a safe heir only while it stays secret. So she folded her hands and bent her head and said in a voice she held perfectly level, because if she let it slip, it would break, "As your grace wishes." And she went out and bolted her door and added that night's file to the roll of proof, her hands quite steady until the work was done, and not one moment after. Whitsun was 10 days off, and up the cliff road, 3 mornings later, came a fine traveling carriage with a charming man inside it, and his widowed sister beside him, come north to bury a cousin and inherit a dukedom, and arriving to their considerable displeasure to find the corpse sitting up in the garden in the sun. Cassius Vane was everything. His cousin was not. Warm where Alaric was shut, quick where Alaric was slow, a man who filled a room the way water fills a boot. He came up the cliff road on a bright May afternoon with his widowed sister Loveday beside him, and embraced the Duke on the gravel with tears standing frankly in his eyes. "Alaric, Alaric, they wrote me you were sinking, and I came expecting." He held his cousin at arm's length and laughed, a little wetly. "And here you are with roses in your cheeks, my dear fellow. It is a resurrection. It is the answer to a whole winter of prayers." He was very good. Eloin, watching from the still room window with her hands gone cold in the strained herbs, thought she had seldom seen anything done so well. Only his eyes betrayed him, and only for half a second, and only to someone already looking. When they left the Duke's healthy face and found hers across the courtyard, they were not warm at all. They were the flat, careful eyes of a man adding a sum that has stopped coming out right. He knew within a day exactly where the sum had gone wrong. His cousin, who was meant to be 3 weeks under the sod, spoke of nothing but the quiet, strange wife who had nursed him back. the woman from the cove. The Duchess, the servants had begun to worship. Cassius Vane had staked £11,000 and 3 years of patient work on a house with no one in it who would look. He had come north to collect. And he had found the one thing his whole design could not survive. A witness who was also a healer standing squarely between him and everything he believed himself owed. He did not blunder at it as Nietzsche had. Vane did not threaten. He charmed. He found her alone in the still room on his third evening and leaned in the doorway and admired the ordered shelves and said how remarkable it was, really, what she had done with the place and with his poor cousin in so few months. "You are a very capable woman, Your Grace. I confess I had not expected it. Capable women are so rare and so inconvenient." He smiled. "I do wonder what a lady of your evident gifts was doing, buried out here as sick nurse to a dying man. One asks oneself what such a clever creature wants, what she knows." He let it rest. "I am fond of my cousin. Very fond. I should be sorry to see anyone take advantage of his weakness, his grief, his signature. You take my meaning, I am sure. You take everything else so quickly." And he inclined his head and left her. And Eloan understood that she had just met the real enemy and that he was worth 10 of Nietzsche. He set his sister to the work. He was too clever to do himself. Loveday Vane was 35, handsome in a tired, careful way, and poor with the particular grinding poverty of a gentlewoman come down in the world who must smile at everyone who might yet prove useful. She attached herself to Eloan with a great show of sisterly warmth. She admired the still room. She asked, so softly, after Eloan's people. "Trevik. Now, where are the Treviks from?" "The South, you say? I feel sure I know the name. Had you a large family, and before your marriage you must have led such a quiet life. Whatever did you do with your days?" The questions fell soft as wool, and under each of them Eloan felt the small, hard hook. She gave Loveday nothing but the plain agreed history. A gentleman father, dead. 2 young brothers, a quiet life. No fortune. But she saw the bright eyes measuring her, and she knew a woman who watches for her living finds in the end the thing that is hidden, and she began to count the days. She was counting other days too, now in the privacy of her own body. She had been certain for a week. The signs were small and unmistakable to a woman who had midwifed 100 others. The sickness she hid at dawn, the changes only she could read. She carried the Duke's air and told not one living soul, and the knowledge sat in her like a banked coal, warm and terrible at once, for it altered everything. A living child of Alaric's body swept Cassius Vane clean out of the succession. Nothing left to inherit, no reason on earth to hurry the Duke to his grave. The child was the single fact that could end the whole conspiracy without a magistrate or a scrap of proof, and it was, for exactly that reason, the most dangerous fact in the house. The instant Vane learned of it, he would have not one life to end before Whitsun, but 3. The Duke, the Duchess, and the unborn thing standing between him and £11,000 of ruin. A secret heir kept them all breathing. Unknown one. Signed their warrants. So she carried it, and hid it, and worked faster. Because they were hurrying now, and she could feel it. On the 4th night after Vane's coming, Nietzsche tried to end it. Eloan woke in the chair she kept across the Duke's door, to a sound that had no business being there, a soft step, the small click of a stopper, and found the physician at the bedside in the dark, with a fresh draught in his hand, murmuring to the half-waking Duke that a man could not mend without his physic. Eloan crossed the room without a word, took the cup from Alaric's hand before it reached his lips, and poured it out on the stone floor between her feet and the doctor's, where it hissed faintly.
"His Grace has all the physic he requires,"
she said. "Good night, Dr. Nietzsche." They looked at one another over the guttering candle, the healer and the poisoner, and no smile passed between them now at all. He knew that she knew. She knew that he knew it. and each of them understood. The thing had become, at last, a race. She barely left the Duke after that. She tasted everything that came to him, and slept across his door with the roll of proof beneath her shawl, and she knew she could not keep 3 lives balanced on a knife's edge for very long. Whitsun was 6 days off, then 4. The papers to free her lay drawn and waiting on the library table for 2 signatures. And the proof in her oilcloth had grown at last into a thing she believed a magistrate could not wave aside. The dated files, the apothecary's own ledger of a poison bought in a healer's name, the copied letter, the columns of stolen stores. It wanted only the moment and a witness of rank enough that even a charming man could not laugh him out of the room. She had meant to choose that moment herself, carefully, as she chose everything. She was not to be given the choice. The thread came into Loveday's hands 3 days before Whitsun. It had cost her brother only a letter or 2, sent south the moment he first heard that a strange wife had hauled his cousin back from the grave. And the reply arrived, the way ruinous news always seems to, just as everything else was climbing to its height. A Miss Eloan Trevick, gentleman's daughter, had indeed lived in that southern town, and had been known there, in the years before her sudden northern marriage, to go daily among the sick poor of a charity fever house, dressing wounds and dosing fevers like any apothecary's drudge. Her late father had died a bankrupt under a cloud of debt, and no respectable family in the county would any longer receive her. Cassius Vane read the letter twice, and for the first time since he had arrived, he smiled the smile that reached his eyes. Here was the whole game turned in a single stroke. He need not kill the Duke in a hurry and risk the noise of it. He need only destroy the one person standing guard. And she had handed him the weapon herself years ago, in a charity wart. A low, fraudulent wife who had wormed her way into a grieving Duke's bed and dosed him nightly with draughts of her own secret-making, from her own hidden stock of drugs, while the estate's honest licensed physician was thrust aside and the accounts fell into ruin. Turn it the right way about, and it was not the Duchess who had saved the Duke. It was the Duchess who had been killing him. He chose his moment as she might have chosen hers, and he chose it better. Whitsun Eve, the whole household assembled, the district magistrate Sir Hollis Carn dining at Wincliffe by long custom, and Nietzsche at his elbow ready to swear to whatever was wanted. Vane rose at the end of dinner, tapped his glass and said with tears, once more standing ready in his warm brown eyes, that it grieved him past words but that love for his cousin compelled him, that there was something the whole company, and the good magistrate in particular, most urgently needed to know about the woman who called herself Duchess of Wincliffe. Every face at the long table turned toward Eloan, and she looked, not at Vane, but at her husband, and saw, with the falling of the heart she had dreaded for months, the old shut look beginning to settle again over Alaric's face, closing him quietly away. "By all means, cousin," Alaric said into the silence, and his voice had gone flat and far off. "Tell us." And Cassius Vane told them, beautifully. He was so very sorry. He had made his inquiries only out of love, but the company should know that the woman at the foot of the table was no gentlewoman at all. A bankrupt's daughter, who had spent her years before marriage as a common drudge in a charity fever house, dosing the poor with her own 2 hands, who had come into this house under a false color of gentility, who had, by her own admission, been physicking the Duke nightly with secret draughts of her own making, from a private store of drugs she kept hidden in her rooms, while the estate's honest licensed physician was pushed aside. "I say nothing of what those draughts contained," Vane said, with a delicacy more damning than any charge. "I say only that my cousin was a dying man until this apothecary's woman took charge of his cup, and that she stands to be handsomely settled upon at the very hour of his death. Sir Hollis, I appeal to you as a magistrate. I appeal to you as Alaric's oldest friend. Doctor." Nietzsche rose gravely at his side and swore that every word was true. that he had watched with alarm as the Duchess interfered with his treatment, that he could not answer for what she had been giving his patient. Sir Hollis, Cairn, a heavy, honest man, looked down the table at Eowyn, with a face gone grim, and Alaric did not look at her at all. He looked at the cloth, and the old stillness had come down over him like a tide going out, and Eowyn saw him deciding in his wounded and exhausted heart that he had been made a fool of by the one person he had let past his guard. Every face at the long table had turned to her, and Eowyn, who had dreaded exactly this moment, the whole of her life, the moment of being seen and named and stripped bare, found as she rose that the dread was simply gone. It is a strange thing to spend years bracing against a door and to have it flung open at last, and to feel only the clean, cold air beyond it. "Everything my cousin has told you of my history is true," she said, and her voice carried the whole length of the table, level and unhurried. "I am Eowyn Trevec. My father died a bankrupt. I nursed him through 4 years of his dying. And when the money was gone, I went to the fever house at the town's edge, and learned, among the poor, to set bone and draw fever and bring back the drowned, because there was no one else to do it, and I found that I could. I have hidden it since the day I married, because a woman who has laid hands on the sick poor is a woman no house will keep. I am precisely the low, capable, dangerous creature Mr. Vane says I am." She let it stand a moment in the stunned quiet, and it is the only reason the Duke of Wyncliffe is alive to hear him say it. She laid the oilcloth roll on the white cloth and opened it before the magistrate's eyes. "Sir Hollis. His Grace has not been wasting of grief. He has been poisoned, a little every night, the better part of a year, in the tonic that comes to his door in Dr. Nietzsche's name." She set out the files in their row, each sealed and dated in her own hand. "Here is a measure drawn off every night these 5 weeks. Have any physician in England you trust assay them. He will find antimony and arsenic enough to bury a strong man slowly. Here the apothecary's paper is the honest apothecary's own account of the quantities of that same mineral doctor Nietzsche has bought this year past in a healing man's name, and charged to this estate quantities no doctor alive could want for any lawful cure. Here is a letter I copied from Nietzsche's locked case, in a hand this table may find it recognizes, ordering that his patient's improvement must not continue, and the business be finished before Whitsun, before, that is, the arrival of a traveler whose initial is set down plain. And here, the 2 columns, is what the estate stores truly cost, against what your steward Prisk entered for them, the difference running 3 years into pockets that were never his Grace's." She looked up. "I did not save my husband from his grief. I saved him from his air." For one heartbeat, no one in the room so much as breathed. Then Cassius Vane laughed, a light, warm, practiced laugh, and it was the worst thing he could have done, for it was the laugh of a man across a card table, and every soul at that dinner heard it and knew at once that it did not belong to an innocent one. "This is a fever house woman's invention," he began. "A clever fraud, dressing her own crime as, 'The letter is in your hand, Mr. Vane. It was Prisk.'" The steward had gone the color of tallow, and he stood half out of his chair with his voice shaking, a soft, weak man who had done wicked things for a hard master, and felt the whole weight of them come down on him at once. "I'll not hang for you. I kept the books as you bade me, and paid Nietzsche as you bade me. And heaven forgive me, I held my tongue when the old Duchess took ill, but I never touched his Grace's cup. That was Nietzsche. That was always Nietzsche. And it was your money, Mr. Vane. Every quarter, gone to your creditors. I kept the letters. I have the letters." And he was weeping now, the whole account spilling out of him in a flood. He could not stop. Sir Hollis stood. He sent 2 men to the dispensary, and they came back with the squat blue unlabeled bottle, and the magistrate drew the stopper and did not taste it, but looked at Eowyn, and she nodded once, and that was enough. Nietzsche bolted for the door and found Bramwell and 2 grooms already filling it. Vane did not run. He stood very still, all the warmth gone out of his handsome face, a man watching 3 years of patient work fall to pieces in the space of 5 minutes. "You have nothing," he said to Elowen, low, almost admiring. "A servant sniveling and a bottle any enemy might have planted. I am the Duke's heir. When this noise dies down, I am still the heir, and heirs can afford to be patient. You have won an evening, madam. You have not won the war. Are not the heir, Mr. Vane." She said it quietly, and she said it looking at her husband, not at him, because he was the one who most needed to hear it, and the one she had most feared to tell. "You have not been the heir for some weeks now, though I have let you go on believing it, because a man who thinks he still stands to inherit does nothing hasty." She laid her hand flat, for the first time before them all, against the front of her plain gown. "I am carrying the Duke of Wincliffe's child. There is an heir to this house already, and it is not you, and it never will be. There was never any war for you to win. There was only a child you did not know to be afraid of. The room went to uproar. Elowen did not hear it." She was watching Alaric's face, where the shut look was not closing now but breaking open, wave on wave, disbelief and grief, and a slow and terrible understanding of everything he had said to her at that window, and of what she had carried in silence rather than spent it to hold him. They took Vane and Nietzsche in the grey of the next morning to answer at the county assizes. That left Loveday. She had sat frozen through the whole of it, and now she stood in the emptying room with her brother's ruin on her, shaking, all her careful gentility fallen off her at once. "I suppose you will have me taken too," she said, with the brittle courage of a woman who has nothing left to lose. "I carried his letters. I asked my questions. I found you out, and I handed you to him. Well, do it. I have not had a shilling of my own in 15 years. A cell will be no colder than the rooms I have lodged in on other people's charity." Elowen looked at her a long moment, and did not gloat, because she had learned young that gloating is the one gift you can always refuse the people who wanted you to fail. You watched, and you carried tales, and you told yourself it was survival. I know the argument well. I made it myself, in this house, while a man was poisoned 3 doors from my bed. You did not measure the dose, Loveday. You never lifted the cup. Your whole crime was being frightened and doing a frightened woman's small dishonest work, rather than starve. I am poorly placed to hang anyone for that. She drew a breath. There is a cottage on the far side of the park, sound and empty. You may live there quietly, on an income of your own that answers to nobody, neither a servant nor a mistress, and no longer worn to the bone with pretending. You'll owe it to no one, and to me least of all. I want that plain between us, or go, if you would rather. But you will not go to a cell on my account." "Loveday." Vane stared at her as though she had been struck. She had braced herself for punishment, and had no armor at all against mercy, and it broke her open where justice would only have hardened her. And then the room was empty. At last the long table a wreck of guttered candles and spilled account books, and the Duke of Wincliffe and his low, hidden, dangerous wife stood at its 2 far ends with the truth all told between them, and neither of them, for a long moment, able to cross the length of it to the other. It was Alaric who crossed the room. In the end, he came down the length of the ruined table, slowly, like a man walking a deck that will not hold still, and stopped an arm's length from her, and for a while could not speak at all. "You knew," he said at last. "When I stood at that window and told you I would set you free, you knew you were carrying my child, and you let me say every word of it. And you said nothing. I did. Why?" It was torn out of him, the same word his cousin had thrown at her, but from the opposite side of the heart. You held it in your hand, one word, and I could not have freed you if I'd wished to. One word, and Vane was finished. You had the thing that would have ended all of it, and you carried it in silence for weeks and let them come within a cup of killing you. For pity's sake, Elowen. Why? And she gave him the truth, because she was done, forever, with hiding it. Because a child in my belly is a chain, Your Grace, not a choice. If I had told you at that window, you would have done the honorable thing. You always do the honorable thing. It is very nearly the death of you. You would have torn up the papers and kept me out of duty to your heir, and I would have spent the rest of my life the wife you were too decent to be rid of. I have been the thing people keep because they must, the whole of my life. I did not want to be kept, not by you, of all the men on earth. Her voice did not break, though it cost her. I would sooner have gone free and alone with your child than stayed as a duty. So I said nothing, and I saved your life because I could not help saving it, and I meant to go in the spring and never tell you at all. Alaric was quiet a long moment. Then he turned and took up, from the table where they had lain, all evening among the spilled proof, the lawyer's papers, the deed of separation drawn and ready wanting. Only 2 names. He held them a moment. Then he tore them across, and again, and let the pieces fall. "There," he said, "now hear me, because I shall only manage this once, and badly. I have spent 3 years signing whatever was set before me, because reading it cost more than I could pay. I will not do that to you, so I am putting nothing before you. Not the child. The child is provided for and yours, and needs no father's roof to be safe under. I will settle Wyncliffe on it tonight, and you may raise it in London or on the moon, and I will not say one word against it. Not the estate, it does not need you. It has had its true mistress since the night she came down that cliff, whatever I chose to call her. Not duty, not gratitude." He drew a breath that shook. "There is not one thing left that you need from me, Elowen. You are an heir's mother, and a healer, and a woman of your own means, and there is nothing under this roof you cannot have without me. That is exactly why I am asking. Not because the house wants you, because I have been dead 3 years, and a woman came down a cliff in the rain and would not let me stay drowned, and I find I want to spend whatever life I have left being looked at plainly and without fear by the one soul who never once flinched from me. Stay because you choose it, or go with everything, and my blessing. The choice is yours, the whole of it, from here on, yours and no one else's." The candles had guttered almost to nothing. Below the open windows, the tide was coming in over the stones of the cove, unhurried, taking what it had come for. Elowen looked at him, at the shut face come all the way open at last, awake and unguarded and afraid, and she thought of the 3 years she had meant to spend safe, and of the small provided for freedom he was holding out to her with both hands, and of how little in the end she wanted it. "Alaric," she said. She had never once used his name, and the sound of it went through him visibly, like warmth into a cold hand. "I have spent my whole life being safe. I was so very good at it. I hid what I was and kept to the shadows and asked for nothing, and it kept me alive, and it very nearly kept me from ever living at all." She crossed the last of the distance between them herself. "I do not need you. You are quite right. I never did. That is exactly why you may believe me when I tell you. I choose you freely, as myself. Yes, I will stay. Yes, I will be your wife, in truth, and not in contract. On one thing only I will hold you." The ghost of the old dry humor came back into his face, whole, for the first time. "Ask it. You will come down to the water with me. Not tonight, but before the child is born, you will walk down to that cove on your own 2 feet, and stand where the sea took your brother, and let it be a place where a thing was saved, as well as one where a thing was lost." She laid her hand against his face. "The drowned are not always lost, Alaric. I've been trying to tell you so since the night I came." And the Duke of Wyncliffe laughed, a broken, astonished, wholly living sound that no one under that roof had heard in 3 years, and it went out through the open windows and down the cliff to meet the incoming tide. By high summer, There was no one left at Wyncliffe who called Eowyn anything but its true mistress. The east rooms were opened and aired. The leaking roofs were mended by the men who were actually paid to mend them, and the tenants' cottages on the moor along with them. And every shilling Prisk and Vane had bled from the estate in 3 years was counted to the last penny, and returned to the people it had been squeezed from. What the convicted men could not repay, Alaric made good himself, and reckoned it the cheapest money he had ever spent. Cassius Vane and Dr. Sester Relba. Each answered at the county assizes, and the law dealt with them as it deals with men who poison for an inheritance. Prisk, who had turned and told the whole of it, was not hanged. He was dismissed without a character, and lived out his days a small frightened clerk in the town, which Eowyn judged punishment enough for a weak man, and Alaric, who would once have wanted blood, found he agreed. Loveday Vane lived quietly in the cottage at the park's edge on her small, sure income that answered to nobody, and did not soften all at once, for 15 years of fear do not thaw in a season. But she came up to the house at Eowyn's, asking, discovered she had a real gift for the still room, took it over entirely, and the two women arrived in time at something that was not quite friendship but was built on a truer thing. Two people who both knew to the bone how wearing it is to be poor and proud in other people's houses. The Dowager Duchess Honoria, so nearly murdered for the crime of paying attention, recovered every ounce of her sharpness and most of her temper, and lived to hold her great-great-grandchild in her ruined hands on a bright morning that autumn. The child was a girl, which delighted the old woman beyond all measure and dismayed the succession lawyers, and mattered not at all, for the entail had been broken and resettled, and the girl would have Wyncliffe whole. Honoria pronounced her the only member of the family with any sense, allowed herself a single tear, informed the room that this was the very utmost any woman of reason should ever concede to sentiment, and lived 2 years more to prove she had meant it. And one still evening before the child was born, the Duke of Wyncliffe walked down the cliff path to the cove, for the first time in 3 years, his wife's hand in his, and stood among the wet stones where the sea had taken his brother and given back a stranger's son, and he did not drown there standing up, as he had drowned every day for 3 years. He let the tide come in over his boots, and let it go out again, and found that he was still there when it had gone. Eowyn kept her roll of instruments after that in a proper case in the still room, no longer hidden at the bottom of any box, for the Duchess of Wyncliffe was a healer, and the whole county might know it and welcome. They came to her from miles along that coast, the drowned and the fevered and the women in hard labor, and she turned none of them away, because she had never in her life been able to stand by and watch a thing be lost that might yet be saved. She had come to Wyncliffe to vanish, to pass 3 gray years as no one at all, and slip away unmissed, safe and small and forgotten. Instead, she had been seen to the very floor of herself, named and stripped and known. And she had discovered to her lasting astonishment that the thing she had run from the whole of her life had been the wrong thing to fear all along. To be truly known by the right person was not the trap she had always taken it for. It was the first safe harbor she had ever had.